Yinspired is dedicated to all the grandmothers and aunties whose voices weren't heard or listened to. Created for the daughters. Aloha and welcome back to Yinspired, a podcast celebrating different perspectives in Chinese medicine and integrative medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Haunani Chong-Drake, a clinical doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, licensed acupuncturist in the United States, a cultural practitioner and steward, a mom, a dog mom, and a military spouse. Today, I'm very excited to share with you a special guest. I know in my intro episode, I said I'm really going to focus on interviewing and having conversations with the everyday practitioner. I'm very excited to share with you a special conversation with someone who is a little more than just your everyday practitioner. She is an author, film producer, an artist, writer, songwriter, just an extraordinary individual. And more importantly, I feel very blessed that I can call her a friend, a dear friend. We were actually surf buddies. And so I welcome you to the podcast, Dr. Shamini Jain. Welcome to Yinspired. I am so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your energy, and I cannot wait to see what unfolds in this conversation between us today.
Well, I'm so excited too, Haunani. It's so great to reconnect, and thank you so much for having me with you in this beautiful dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who don't know Dr. Shamini Jain, I will make sure that you have her professional bio for you to look at, to click on all the links, which you will want to do after this conversation. I feel so blessed to call you a friend, my surf buddy. And so thank you. Thank you. I know your time is so precious and valuable. And I
I have to
just
share something, Haunani,
what?
because I have such deep respect and admiration for you as well. And I remember our early days on the beach in San Diego. And we can talk about this too. As you mentioned, I've done a lot of writing. I do science and stuff like that. So I lived as a disembodied head for much of my life. And I still remember talking with you saying, Hanani, I want to be able to pop up better on my surfboard. How do I do that? And you had me doing lunges on the beach. I had never, you were like, do lunges. And I looked at you like with this blank stare. And I was like, what? What are lunges?
What's
Like,
a
I
lunge?
literally had no idea what a lunge was. And you were like, you just looked at me and very gracefully said, watch me. And so you proceeded to have me lunge on the beach with you. I don't know if you remember this, but it is burned into my brain. And I want to happily share with you that now I do lunges on a regular basis.
I love that. I do have that memory. It is in my head. I can see our boards on the sand. I know what beach we were on. Absolutely. That's incredible that you remember that too. It's so funny how through the years, like 20 years later, what sticks, and those little things. We often think it's something huge or big that's going to that implant that memory. But yeah, all those times together, all those conversations we used to have, just waiting, bobbing on the board, being there in the water, those have filled my life in so many ways. Driving, having kids, all the things where it's like, oh, I've had this conversation before, right? And it's so, yeah, I'm excited to see what happens between us today. For those who don't know you, though, who may not have read your book, do you mind introducing yourself just however you want, formally or informally, so the listeners can get an idea of who you are and what you're up to these days?
Sure. So my name is Shamini. I was given that name by my mother. It was actually, that's a whole story in itself. She just sort of popped into her consciousness. It's not a very common name. I'm of East Indian descent. I was born and raised in South Carolina. I am a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. Play lots of roles, as I know many of us do. I've been privileged to play the role of a scientist and nonprofit leader. Our nonprofit is called the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And we really accelerate advanced collaboration in the areas of healing. So we've done a lot to share about the science of healing and kind of advance that, but also do a lot of education and community work where we get to highlight leading lights in healing all over. And I'm a person who loves to follow my passion. So that has led me to create Chi, or the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and with it, a lot of creative projects. And I guess sometimes people ask me this, so I'll just mention that I would say I give in to my desires and inspiration a lot. And so that has led me to kind of do a lot of things and kind of go places that I didn't expect to go. So I know some things that I'm not so great at, like planning. Um, I'm more of like an emergent person. So when folks sometimes ask, well, how did you get to write the book or do those TED Talks or create a documentary or create an album? One thing that feels relevant to share is that, like, you don't it's great to plan. I think it's great. There are planners and it's great to be strategic, but sometimes things just happen when you follow your passion. And so my life has just sort of been this love letter to following creative passion. And I'm really grateful that I've been given that opportunity in this life. I think we all have that opportunity, honestly. But we have to kind of rid ourselves of the barriers that keep us from believing in ourselves, in our vision, in our mission, and just have the grit and gratitude to kind of move forward. So that's, I guess, a bit about me.
It's beautiful. Writing a love letter to the creator about all of these pleasure, desire, wants, healing. I mean, I'm sitting here taking it all in, but covered in truth bumps. What's really resonating or like, gosh, what am I feeling? It's almost like this nervousness that you said that because there is so many messages, especially if you go down the road of like a spiritual path. And healing and spiritual, we'll get into that, I'm sure, in our conversation, go hand in hand. And there's so much talk or education about how desires can lead to our demise or how desires are one of the hurdles for living a life, a liberated life or our healing. So when I hear you say that you have actually followed that. You followed the desire, you followed the pleasure, and look at all of these manifestations that you have brought into this world and that you've co-created and bringing community together. It just sits with me differently. It's like my body's rewiring to that.
And I love that. And I really appreciate the openness to talking about what the nature of desire is and what it means to follow it. Because certainly, many traditions, including the ones that you and I come from, speak about desire is, that's the whole problem, right? Like that's Maya. That's the whole contraction of the mind. And, you're wanting something, so you're literally separating yourself from it, from that subject object split. And so there's real truth to that. I think of desire in this way, especially when it leads to a creation, as literally just the creative force wishing to express itself in some way through you. And so that's the experience of it, really is. So when I say desire, it's not the same as, I want a pint of chocolate ice cream, which I do sometimes, although, I've never managed to finish a whole pint of ice cream, but, in my emotional stress, I've gotten close. But
You're
that's a little different, than what I'm talking about, which is more tuning in to what wants to be birthed. So creative desire, I think, is different because it is a co-creative process where you do acknowledge that you're an embodied being in the physical, on this earth, in this planet. You have the privilege of creating in what we might call the third dimension, right? Like in the physical, we have this privilege of doing that. So we actually have the privilege of bringing the divine into the physical through creative desire, should we choose. So this is why, at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, we say we bring together healing practitioners, scientists, educators, and artists to lead humanity to heal ourselves because we all have a facet of wisdom around healing. But what I think, honestly, many of us in the healing arts sometimes forget to recognizing is that healing itself is a creative act. And most healers and many scientists, by the way, that I have met are closet artists of some time, closet creatives. I mean, the truth is we're all creative all the time. So giving into creative desire is a process I think that's a little different from like I want, yum yuck thinking. It's kind of more what wants to be birthed. Could I surrender to that, not knowing the details, not knowing where it's gonna lead, not even having a plan for how that's gonna fit and make me money, you know, but just trust that this deeper desire that I keep tuning into may be something that wants to be birthed through me, either for myself or for my community or for my family or whatever it is. So that's how I experience this, this idea of creative desire. Doesn't mean that all things need to be followed either, but what a beauty, what a gift of like of our humanity to be able to feel into that creative desire and make that decision about whether we want to follow through with it.
I don't know if you could see my smile getting bigger and bigger, but as I shared with you, that's what Yinspired is for me. And this is really my first time listening and just following what wants to come through me, and it's so vulnerable and shaky and terrifying, but it's also been such an incredible gift of joy and connection. I always thought you had to have all the ducks in the road. You had to have all the connections already made. You needed, the planning part had to be done in order for the thing to birth itself. And this has been a totally different process. So one of my questions I had for you was actually going to be, how do you get all the things you have done in your life out in one lifetime? Because you have literally had lifetimes and lifetimes of creations in the time that I've known you in these last 20 years plus. And I was just like baffled. Like, how do you do that? What's your secret sauce? And it sounds like you've already shared that with us. You're
Yeah.
open.
Yeah, I guess I have, and yeah, I was thinking of you when I was talking about following your creative desire, and I'm so grateful that you chose to do that, that you chose to say, "Oh, I'm gonna do this," even if all the trees aren't lined up in a row or, the ducks or whatever they say. It's beautiful to see how when we let go how things can be orchestrated. And so, what I would say also to that, in response to your question of how do you get all these creative things done, is I'm not really doing them. I'm just helping facilitate them, right? I mean, some
Mm,
are more personal. Like my album was personal. I did kind of take initiative, but even then, I downloaded lyrics that I didn't know where they came from and they weren't about me. I'll tell you a story about that. But so there is a letting go that has to happen. So when we give into creative desire, there's, as you know, it's sort of like a surrender, right? I don't know the path. I don't know. I know I have this thing that's moving through me, and I'm going to trust that there's going to be alignment. And so, that is, I think, when we really are able to take that energy, because it is an energy,
mhm,
we align with that force, we align with the spiritual guidance. That's for me personally been huge, to just align things. Does this want to be birthed? Does it want to be birthed through me? Can I sit in that and surrender and say yes and ask for support? And that can
yeah.
be tangible support with things that you want, or guidance, to bring the right people, the right situations, whatever. And so for me, some of the way I'm learning to discern now what's worth doing and what's not worth doing, because, I'm aging, my energy is not quite as much as I used to have, and I have to be a little bit more conservative now with how I use my energy. So now I try to sit back more and really allow myself to be more in a flow feeling rather than a let's push and get this done feeling. And, I think that's crucial for all of us now at this time when there's so many things draining our energy or that could potentially drain our energy. And then there's just life, right? Like we're all busy. We've got to caretake. We've got to do the dishes. We've got to cook. We've got to drive the kids to school. Like whatever we're doing, right? There's a certain amount of energy that we have for things. And creating means that we're co-creating, really. We get energy as we create. So it's this beautiful cycle. And so as we begin to get filled up, then if and I know you're experiencing this with my podcast, that you're getting filled up by doing what you're doing, right? Then you're
Absolutely.
in right relationship, you're in right alignment, and it becomes way easier than you think it is. I
Yeah.
mean, would you say so?
Oh,
Yeah?
yeah. No, I thought yeah, I was like my former excuse to not starting was, "I don't have the time or the energy for this. I cannot burn myself out." And that was my excuse for so many years because burnout's a pattern of mine. I know when I say yes to too many things. And I just got to the place where it was that voice, that wise voice inside was like, I've got your back, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm about to take you through a process. I've got your back and this will begin. If not, I'm gonna start slapping you around. I was like, okay, I'm listening. I always listen to you in the end. Always have. It's taken me a while to like listen to that wise voice and that guiding voice within. But yeah, it fills me. It does. It fills me. Every conversation, even the menial tasks that I usually don't like to do, it brings me such joy, like putting the pieces together, writing an email for a newsletter, all of that, which, I maybe have to push myself in other areas to do those same tasks. But for this, yeah, the cup is being filled.
That's the beauty of creativity, isn't it? The beauty of the creative force, and such a necessary medicine for our time. I like to remind people that we're all creative. You're
Yeah,
creative by, what you choose to wear, what kind of food you wanna make, like, whatever this by being alive, you are by nature creative because creative life force is coursing through your veins. It's nourishing every cell of your being. It's allowing you to communicate. And I think sometimes about these barriers to creativity that people often feel. I can't do it. I'm not creative. I don't have the energy. I don't have the community. Those are all real felt barriers. I'm not going to lie, and sometimes a project or, an idea might feel massive. I'll just share with you an aside. I was talking with a professor at a tier one research university yesterday. And, she's about my age. She's an accomplished researcher, a doctor, doing incredible research with patients. And she has this calling now. She has this inkling, more than an inkling, to do work aligned with what we're doing, studying biofield type practices with her patients. And I could feel the fear in her. And I could feel the yearning in her. And I could feel the need for support in her because she felt alone,
Yeah.
you know? And so she kept asking me, "Well, how did you do it? And what did you do?" Like, she's looking for a formula because she's a planner. And I don't think it was helpful that I told her I didn't plan any of this, you know? I was just stubborn. I told her I was just stubborn. Like, I knew what I wanted to do, and I just set out to do it, and I kept asking for help until I got the right folks, the right mentor for graduate school that said, when I said, "I wanna do an energy medicine study for my dissertation. Would you support me in that?" And I just kept looking for the so there is a bit of perseverance, but I wanna highlight this need that we all have now for community to nourish ourselves. So there's so many ways that we can nourish ourselves in these relatively hard times, right? That could get
Yeah.
more difficult. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least in our lifetime that we've been alive for sure. For the
Yeah,
last
like
4
it's
decades. Yeah. Yeah.
man, it's a tough time. Like if you're awake
Yeah.
to the world, it's hard not to get drained. Even if you're, good with digesting media and just, like just even if you get 5 minutes of news and you don't glue yourself to the TV for 5 hours, which I hope none of us are, because that's a huge drain. But like we're responsible, right? We're not going to bypass. We're not going to say there aren't horrible things going on in the world, but we have to recognize that we will feel the drain of sadness, depression, anxiety about what's happening to our people, what's happening across the globe, what's happening in the country here where we're living in the United States. Like, those are all really valid concerns. And energetically, we have to accept that, yeah, there are times we're going to feel really drained by that. So, how do we then gather the energy to bring beauty, to bring harmony, to bring that sense of right relationship and alignment back? Because that's the medicine that we and our community needs. Because we know that what we're seeing right now is not actually the reflection of who we are as humans. It's just not, right?
Right.
It's so diminished. It's so contracted. It's so undesirable, to literally, I think, everyone on the planet at this point. Like, we're literally just faced with our collective shadow screaming at us at this point, like, "Wake up," right? And yet we don't wanna be moving with exhaustion, so this resourcing with energy, I think, is a key thing for all of us right now, whether we're already on this journey of service or, creativity. All of us are in some way. How do we make sure that we're really giving from that full cup? That's a really key thing. And that's what I love about our holistic practices, including acupuncture, including qigong, including, so many of these practices, all these ancient traditions. They gave us a pathway, right? They gave us a pathway for nourishment, a pathway for connection with our whole being, with each other. And all we have to do is engage in that.
Yeah. The maps are there around the globe, wherever people come from, born to, drawn to. The maps are there. We just have to be willing. And it sounds like your friend and colleague too. It's like the map, she found a map and she feels hesitant to go down that path because maybe she'll be seen differently from colleagues or family. I think so many people listening to this will understand this moment in time or several moments in time when you're presented with a map of seeing the world differently or seeing something you want to get involved with, whether it's more conscious based activities or you leave finance to start acupuncture school and Chinese medicine school, or you go from research into being an herbalist or a doula, right? We're presented with all these options throughout our life, and usually our hesitancies are not from if we are really aligned with ourselves, if we're really being centered in that next step. But usually our hesitancies come from the external. What will my
Yeah.
family think? What will
Right.
my church think? What will my spouse think? What will my kids think? And that gets to identity. That gets to the core also of that life force energy.
It
So,
does. It gets to, will I be loved and accepted for who I am? Will I be loved and accepted for who I am? And is who I am what I do? No,
right.
it's
Say that
not.
again. That is such a big
Yeah.
question.
Will I be loved and accepted for who I am? And is who I am what I do? And this is a really rich and nuanced thing to explore for ourselves because, yes, we can say in some way the things that I do, the things that I bring out in the world are reflections of consciousness. They're
Mm,
reflections of consciousness that I'm experiencing that are coming through me, right? So there is some linkage with, of course, the things we think, act, do
mhm,
in our consciousness. No question. But yet our consciousness, our true consciousness is beyond that. We're not our roles. I'm not the film. I'm not the nonprofit. It didn't believe me. I've had as a founder, I had to keep do deep work to disentangle myself from the things that are birthed because we're always attached to our children, right?
right.
Nonprofit founders know it's always our baby. Oh, and I was talking to a nonprofit founder this week, and she's like, "Oh, you know how it is at this stage. It's just demanding babies. They need so much attention and
Mm,
care and love, and it's exhausting." And yeah, that's all true, but they're not us. They
yeah.
actually, even as a founder of anything, even your podcast, right? It's like you're birthing something and you're bringing it out into the world, and then it has its own life and you get to let it go. So it's not you. Your creations have your vibration, but they're not you. They have a life of their own. And it's also, the energy that comes around those things builds it, expands it. So when we get worried about what will people think, we have to kind of remember that we're not so much the doers as the channelers.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking is like, you're a mom, I'm a mom. We birth humans into the world. Not everyone has that option or wants to, and that's fine. But like you said, we're all creators. We're all creating something in our world around us, whether you think of it or not. And then it's its own entity. No matter how much you try to put barriers on it or shape it or feed it a certain food, it's its own life. And it touches on boundaries and who am I and what control do I have? I mean, all the existential questions about life are through anything that we create. And everyone listening to this podcast is a creator. I can tell you that 100%. That's why they're attracted to or drawn to this podcast. I heard someone recently say that throughout history, this is a historian talking, the thing that has brought people through hard times, through plagues, through wars, through civil unrest, through the most unimaginable genocides, has always been the arts, singing, dancing, using your hands to create something. The healers, whether you have a degree or not, there's always been the people who heal, which is like tending to the heart, finding right relationship. And I
Yeah.
think that is so powerful. I remember just stopping and just like breathing that in because I don't know if a lot of people consider themselves quote unquote creative.
Yeah.
There's so much around that word. But what,
There is. And yet, the data is actually very clear. Everyday creativity, which literally could mean just journaling, a few thoughts in a journal. It could just be singing a song that, maybe you didn't even write, but it's just a song that you love. It can be dancing in your kitchen. The data actually suggests that when we engage in creativity, not maybe even from a generative standpoint, but just sort of engage in the flow of art making, of art
yeah,
expression, our mental health is better as a result.
yeah,
There's less
mood
depression, there's
lifts,
less
endorphins.
anxiety,
Yeah,
there's less pain. We are literally running our bodies with joy juice when we do that, and we are meant to be joyful. Joy is nourishment, it's medicine. It's not a bypass. As you know, in our traditions, in the Vedic traditions, in the Tantric traditions, we describe pure consciousness as Sat Chit Anand. Why Anand? Anand is joy, right? Sat being truth, Chit being consciousness, Anand being joy. What? Wait a minute, pure consciousness is joy? It's Anand?
yeah,
What's that about? And why is that important? Because when we are unconstricted, when we recognize that we're not separate from anything else, when we're in that state of oneness, it's a natural experience which those who have had the privilege to taste into that can only explain through these terms, Anand. which we translate sometimes as to bliss. Bliss is like joy to the nth level, right? And there is no subject object split in that experience. So that's where, the desire to joy, to bliss is not tuning out the world, but actually becoming it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Becoming in alignment with it. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm on track with you. I am feeling the vibes with you. I'm so happy we're having this conversation. Were you always like this as a child too? I mean, is this how you were raised? What was your relationship with topics like consciousness, healing, bodies, medicine? What was like what was little Shamini like? So we can like put this
It's so
all into context here.
funny you ask this because I sometimes realize, like, I'm probably not, quote, "normal." I mean, I think that's what I'm getting from, around and how did that, like, quote, "not normalness" show up in me? Yeah, I was a bookworm, and I mentioned this in my book, actually, that I remember being 8 years old going up to the library in my house. We had this little library. It was, like, up near an attic. I'd, like, kind of climb up these curly stairs. There was this little loft space with this window where I could see the trees, and there's just this little library there of my parents' books, right? Because I'm, like, 8 or 9. And there are my mom's Cosmo magazines, which, back then in the 80s, and shoot, it was really like best sex positions, how to get a man to like you, yeah, all this stuff. And right next to it are these books, Easy Journey to Other Planets, and like literally the title. So I'm like, wow, I pick up the Easy Journey to Other Planets because I'm more intrigued by that. And I'm like, what are they talking about? This stuff must be science. Is this science fiction? Like, what are they talking about? Easier. So astral travel, this and that. So growing up as a Jan and being very rooted in the Jan tradition, we learned about subtle bodies. And, I just was a bookworm. So I was reading all about the metaphysics and being the daughter of a scientist, just also being like, this can't be real. We don't learn about this in school. What are they talking about? How do they know that alternate nostril breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system? Where's the data? So, like, leaving that young, that was like, bullshit, prove it. There's that part of me. And then
Mhm.
there was just this fascination with consciousness. And I actually don't think that's abnormal, honestly. I think pretty much all of us probably have that. There's a reason why telepathy tapes is now the number one podcast, right?
So glad you brought it up.
I just did a podcast with them recently. I don't know when they're releasing it, but they're broadening now beyond, even just what the beautiful work that they're doing, expanding consciousness and stuff. But the point being, we're all hungry for this,
Yeah,
right? And again,
absolutely.
it's just, I think because I just didn't really, I don't know if it's that I just didn't care or that I just accepted that I wasn't like anyone else at a really early age. I would go to my parents' parties, and we're Punjabi. My family is Punjabi, which means even in addition to being austere and like very connected to the Jan tradition, which is very much about nonviolence and, austerity in different ways, Punjabis party. So they would have these parties and they'd be dancing all night and they would drag the kids and we had no choice. So all the kids would be running around like animals, just doing whatever they're doing,
Yeah.
playing, having fun. And I would just get bored. So I would sit in the corner and just read. And everybody's like, what's wrong with her? I don't know. I'm just really into this book right now. So deep curiosity, I think when I
Mhm.
was young is what fueled me to go into the direction that I did. And being okay with being curious and being okay that, I wasn't like everyone else. It's okay. I don't have to fit in. It's just, I'd be friendly. I love
Mhm.
everyone. I don't always fit in everywhere I go. It's okay.
I think that's part of the magic of why so many people across the globe in all different neighborhoods, classes are just so drawn to you is because there is that confidence of I mean, there's so many millions of reasons. You are also just you are light. Like you step into a room and you are light, but that confidence of being okay, not being like everyone else is a superpower. How many of us have taken a path less taken? We're on a road less traveled. And yet there's a part of us still wanting to fit in and belong because there is a human instinct to want to belong, right? The limbic part of our brain is saying, if I don't belong, I am going to be an outcast. I'm going to die, no connection. And so
Mhm.
there's like these two parts of
Yeah.
ourselves. The one part that's saying, I know I'm not like everyone else.
Mhm.
I really want to be okay not being like other I know it's part of me. I've never felt like I've belonged. And then there's this other part of you at the exact same time saying, red light, red light. Are you sure?
Yes. And may I add another part? Maybe that when we have that statement or that thing, I don't belong here, or I don't fit in, or I'm different, then the arising question can also be, to whom, where do I belong? Or, who do I belong to? And then we recognize that, like, oh, I belong to my soul. I belong to the earth. I am the earth. I am nature expressing itself in every moment, and I'm resonating that out, and maybe I don't fit into the social structures, but those social structures are just mental constructions. And I think for us, being women of color coming from, a non-white heritage growing up in the United States, this is a really critical conversation. And if you don't mind, I will go back to childhood a little bit more and kind of flesh out this lack of belonging.
Please.
So I recognized that I didn't fit in, but I didn't know why. Okay. I really
Mm,
didn't, and it wasn't until, I met my husband and learned a little bit more about his experience growing up as an Indian man in a time where, it wasn't fashionable to be Indian in a town that was fairly racist, and him being a man and kind of, or a growing boy, and kind of the physical violence that he experienced because of his skin color. His sister literally being chased down by white supremacists in a truck. So their experience of not belonging was palpable, to say the least, right? For me, I was the only Indian kid in a southern town in, classrooms where all the kids were white, you know, maybe also some black kids too, right? I didn't really fit in with either culture. I was from a different religion too. Most of my friends all of them really were Baptist Christian. And I did make friends. Most of my friends were white. They were white friends and they were Baptist Christian, and they'd come to my house and ask about my religion. I went to church with them until the Baptist Christian minister said, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell, and looked straight at me. And I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't come here anymore. I do believe that Jesus was an incredible man. I have deep respect and reverence for him, but he's not my only savior. I wouldn't say
yeah.
that. But I guess that sense of recognizing early on, because my skin color was different, because my culture was different, because I looked different, because my background was different. I didn't I didn't tag it to race then. I didn't. And I still don't know if it was all race, because there are lots of things that made me different from those kids. But early on, I think when you recognize that on a subconscious or conscious level that you don't belong, it's also a sense of freedom. And I really want us to all take that in for a minute. Like, when you realize you don't belong somewhere, it means you're actually free of those constructions that make you feel like you need to fit in. Yeah, and then, wow, what can I do? What do I want to do? And again, who do I belong to? I belong to myself. I belong to spirit. I belong to my ancestors. I belong to my family. I belong to where I want to be.
I ask myself that a lot throughout the week. Like, who is this work for? Who am I working for? And I know my answer. It used to be the company or my job or my kids or my husband to keep the marriage together or whatever. But years ago, in my personal spiritual practice, when the real answer came through, I really know who I'm working for. Nothing has been the same. Everything's the same externally, and nothing has been the same internally.
I love that. I really love that. Yeah, I really love that. And I have these questions come up for me often too, because, when we're dealing with creating things with different partnerships, different entities, different groups, most of the structures that most of us are interacting with at this point are still very hierarchical, third dimensional, often patriarchal, in my view, slow to change oftentimes. So sometimes I do have to take a deep breath and ask myself again, who am I working for? What am I in service to? To whom am I in service? Who am I in service to? Who's my real boss? Who's my boss?
I like that. Who's my boss? I love that. Yeah.
And so then that's where we ask for help too, right? And for me, I'm pretty clear right now that those of us, and I know many listening on this podcast, will recognize and resonate with this. If we consider ourselves light leaders, and I'd venture to say that we're all light leaders, should we choose to be, right? And many listening are. We're in service to the light. And we can ask for guidance. We can ask for support so that those structures and systems align themselves better, maybe even help evolve, where we don't have to maybe do as much efforting, but just align with the folks. So there's so many wonderful, quote, intrapreneurs, people who are in those structures and systems, who know how to navigate them, who know how to work with them, and can bring light to those organizations and evolve them. So that is possible. And some people are drawn to be those kinds of intrapreneurs and kind of foster that systems change from the inside out. We can talk
Yeah.
about the healthcare system all day long. I can't tell you how pleased I am to hear more and more of the light workers working within those systems, delivering care, delivering acupuncture, delivering energy healing, delivering meditation. These are some of the light leaders that I think are helping to transform those systems. And they are transforming, you know? They are. It's a long road. And then there are others who will choose to say, I don't want to play in that wheel. I'm gonna do it on my own. I set up my own clinic, I set up my own platform, and I serve people that way. And it's so beautiful. There's so many ways to serve.
Yeah. That's so good. This is, I think, a beautiful segue into bringing up your book, which is, knowing you probably are not going to promote it all that much on this podcast. So I'm going to take this opportunity to tell everyone, if you haven't already read Shamini's book, Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science, and the Future of Health. It is a must. If you're listening to Yinspired, you will also be listening to the Audible or reading the book. Ask your library to get it, then go buy your own copy and put it on your gift list to people. It is life-changing, even as a healthcare practitioner who has been in the energy space, the chi field, the prana field. It felt like an exhale to me to hold this book and to read it and to see the research and to see the paradigm shifting, to see the insider perspective that you have and the access that you have as a psychoimmunologist, PhD, a medical doctor path. You have the Reiki path. You have all these different facets of your background in education and access. And to see it from a different part of healthcare, it was
Mhm.
just like, finally, I'm not
No.
crazy. I'm not alone.
Yes. I'm not
For
crazy and
some
I'm not
reason,
alone. Yeah.
I chose this path, or this path really feels like it chose me. I said yes to it. I've never been happier. I know I was birthed onto this planet, whatever is flowing through me. And to have this book was such a relief of, I'm not alone. There is science. I'm not crazy. And at the same time, I am so crazy, but now I'm owning my crazy. Like, everyone else is crazy, right? That was like really my takeaway. I was like, I am crazy, but everyone else is crazier to not see what I'm seeing, which is the unseen. So, a lot of words there, but I highlighted this. I saved it in my notes. It's something I've been so excited to have this conversation with you about, is in one teeny tiny part of your book. It was like a side note. It wasn't even a main focus. You used the term the fallacy of separateness around the idea that we have been conditioned to be isolated beings, disconnected from each other, disconnected from the environment, disconnected from our ancestors. But it's one of the greatest illusions that modern science, including modern medicine, that we might consider modern medicine as like the allopathic route, or
Mhm. Mhm.
has been disseminating. And I just was so thrilled to hear you just lay it on the line. Like, finally, someone speaking truth.
Mm.
And I think it speaks so much to what we're already saying, is that there's a fallacy of the separateness, right? Your friend who is maybe she's a medical doctor or research scientist and also interested in consciousness, that for some
Yeah.
reason they had to be separate, but
Well,
they
right,
don't
and
have
she's
to be.
struggling with this right
And
now,
there's a
right?
struggle.
She's like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, do I just retire and go into the spiritual life because I can't bring it into my work?" And yet there's this deep desire to bring it into my work. So if she approaches this with some community support so that she can stand in her truth and her light, she'll recognize that these aren't separate, right? They've just been, she's been force fed this idea that we can't study the ineffable. you know and she has a deep desire to use the scientific process to explore the things that she really cares about, to explore the things that she thinks are of value to healing, which is the spirit. So, this
Yeah.
whole idea of reuniting science and spirituality, all these things that we say in the Western world. Look, we know the indigenous traditions never had that separation because they were working from models of non-separation in the first place. That's why as you well know, and our listeners well know, we can call Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Tibetan medicine, what do we call them now in these English terms? Whole person medicine, whole person health systems, integrated health, whatever you want to fancy Western jargon you want to put on it. It was always medical and health and healing systems that were born out of a real realization of non separation. And Western science catches up. Oh my gosh, my diet can foster healing. My environment can foster healing. My social relationships, my energy. Well, gee, it's not like we haven't known that for thousands of years, right? We just had to put like that Western jargon on it to help translate, what has already been known for so long into the parlance of healthcare delivery. That's so, again, we're dealing with a system that's based in lots of different layers of separation. And that is challenging for sure. It is. But yes, we should, those of us who are in practice and all, I think it's great. And I think the book really has helped become a tool for practitioners because a lot of times patients will ask, well, like, what's the evidence and where's the evidence? And I don't understand. And so, Haunani, I think I may have shared with you my journey with that book again was an emergence because I didn't set out to write a book. I sat down to do a podcast just like I'm doing with you, hurried, harried, in between appointments and work and research and all this stuff. And I sit down to do this podcast and I realize it's with Tammy Simon, the founder of Sounds True. And I'm like, oh my God, I should have prepared. Um, and I get on and she's like, Shamini, before we begin, I have two questions for you. Where is your book? And can Sounds True have a crack of publishing it? And I said, Tammy, the only person that's been nagging me to do a book is my father. He's been telling me for 20 years I should write a book. Why do you want me to write a book? And she said, because somebody's got to put this together. And someone's got to bring the science with the indigenous perspective together because even me, the founder of Sounds True Publications, people aren't familiar with Tammy Simon and Sounds True. Talk about pioneer and, in this space and the person who helped to make meditation mainstream way back before it was monetizing. She said, and when I talk about energy healing, I still get pushback. When I try to do things in energy healing, I get pushback. So I need you to write this book so people understand that there's a real science behind it, that it actually fits into a whole model system of healing that's thousands of years old and that it's actionable and practical. And so that's what the book sets out to do, as you know.
Yeah.
So the first part is really diving into ancient and modern philosophy of consciousness and healing, exploring the subtle bodies and its relevance to how we understand consciousness and the healing process. The second is all evidence. And we get into everything from the data behind mind-body practices, what we call in the West mind-body practices, which have always been spiritual practices like Qigong and yoga, and the cutting-edge work in energy healing, which, as you know, has been the focus of my research for many decades, a big focus of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. How does energy seemingly heal folks, not just mentally, spiritually, emotionally, but even physically, fostering changes down to cell signaling and preventing the spread of cancer? Like, is that real? Is there data? How does it work? And so the book really gets into all of that. And then, the third part is all practical. Okay, so how do we take this and put it into action? And, there I draw from, lessons in clinical psychology and behavioral medicine, but also from my healing teacher, a grandmaster, I would call of healing, Reverend Rosalind Bruyere, and everything she's taught me personally about energy to kind of summarize it. So I'm happy with the reception, and thank you for saying, kind of like your reflections on it. I think it's a great tool for us to also give to clients, but also just remind ourselves to stand in our own authority about what we're doing and say, hey, there is a real science to it. And let me give you a few tidbits. I mean, that's what the book has to offer, is just like helping get us all up to speed on some of the latest research and feeling really confident about our ability to share that. Yeah, and it's opened a lot of minds already, I think, to the Biofield work, which is great.
Yeah. And so people who aren't familiar with, I think more of the listeners are familiar with terms like chi or prana, but when you're saying biofield work, can you explain to us how that might be similar or different?
Yeah. And, biofield is a westernized term. It was a term that was coined in the National Institutes of Health in the 90s to try to explain phenomena, healing phenomena, including practices like acupuncture, qigong, energy healing, and even bioelectromagnetic medicine. So what did they have in common? And so they called it biofield and they described it as a massless field, not necessarily electromagnetic, that guides the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism. When I'm talking to lay folks, I'll just say fields of energy fields of energy and information that guide our health. And, my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Richard Hammerschlag, likes to say, think of biofield not as a thing, but as a perspective, as our energetic self. And because we can look at the biofield between cells, we can look at the biofields between people, we can look at the biofields within the body, we can look at the biofields of trees. And we can also just explore how looking at the world from a biofield perspective allows us to literally tune in energetically to our environment and feel again instead of just that we're not separate, actually feel that non-separation. And don't we feel that? Don't we feel that when we are doing our practice with clients? We know that we're part of a larger field. We know that we're working with their field, but our field is connected to it. And there's a field that is often guiding our healing, right? So that's the biofield perspective is, I am sovereign and I am connected.
Yeah. I think that's going to be so interesting for people to hear that it's a term that's been used in research and science for not just like 10 years. I mean, let me do some real math here, 30 years. This information that we're talking about when we talk about consciousness or cultural practices that have been continuously practiced, and some of them haven't been continuously practiced because they've actually been forbidden. And there's always someone who's hopefully been able to keep them alive. And so they're reemerging or they're emerging right now into this Western paradigm or this modern era where that is all other. It is old, it's outdated, it doesn't matter. And like you said, unless we give it a new name, then it is somehow accepted. That's really hard for me to swallow. That's where I get really like the fighter in me, the rebel in me gets all worked up. How do you, and I'm sure, all of your incredible connections and backgrounds as well is like, do you get that?
Yeah, it's
Do
fine.
you,
I'm for naming that because I think a lot of practitioners do feel that way, and they're like, "Why are we giving it this jargony term?" And there's a lot of discussion about whether we should be using that term, and what's the right umbrella term, if you will, to help us inquire, ask better questions, and explore this beautiful aspect of our experience. And I kind of fell into the term biofield. Like I didn't create it. Deepak Chopra, who's a friend of mine, and I'm sure listeners know here, tells me, Shamini, you're branded with the term biofield, whether you like it or not. And I'm like, well, I'm not even sure it's the right term. That sucks. I don't think it's branded with anything. First of all, least of all, this term that I didn't create, but because I have been publishing in the area and I've called the practices biofield. I'm, in full stop. Tammy wanted the word biofield in the book. That's why, because I just wanted healing ourselves. And she's like, no, it has to have biofield science in there. And I'm like, okay. So I've made peace with it, and I actually don't mind the term. I still struggle sometimes with it because, one, it's really jargony. I think people don't really understand what it means. Although I will tell you in my talks now, 10 years ago when I said how many people have heard the term biofield, maybe a fourth of the people raised their hand. Now it's more like three-fourths. And this is across different sectors, not even just within healers. So that's exciting. That means that like we're making some progress in the languaging of this. I am also really sensitive to colonialism. In fact, I talked about this in monocultural ethnocentrism in my TEDx talk, which we can talk about because there's plenty to talk about with TED Corporate. From a scientific point of view, concept like biofield might be useful as long as we understand that it's really a plural, not a singular, is because, like, as you know, there are many different aspects of chi. There are many different aspects of prana. Like, it's not all one thing. And, I've been at these beautiful meetings where contemplative scholars have come together to talk about all the ways that different traditions have described the subtle bodies. And so we already know that there's a plurality, right? Think about energy healers as another example, right? Some people see the field as unified. Some people see it as multi-layered. Some people work with the fields outside the body. Other people try to sink into the body and stimulate bone marrow chi. So to the linear mind, it's like mind-boggling. Like, who's right? Like, how could that all work? And the answer is yes, right? So I think of biofield kind of like that too. It's just we're trying to create a term that kind of brings together all of these concepts, models, systems of healing that work with energy and information for healing. And that's really what brings it all together. But it in no way negates our understandings and concepts of prana and chi. And in fact, those need to be brought more out in the light to biofield science to make it successful. So that's how I see it.
that makes me feel a lot more settled and more hopeful rather than angsty and rageful. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's interesting how there might be a stigma. And when I say a stigma, more of like a quote unquote positive stigma. The minute we add bio to something, somehow it's more approved or accepted. right? Like
'Cause it's tied in
biomedicine.
physicality, right? Physicalism.
Yeah,
It
the
panders to the materialist
materialism.
mind.
Yeah, the
Yes.
materialism, which has been reigning for what, 600 years. So anything that directs the brain to that materialistic world makes me feel better or makes someone else feel better. It doesn't make me feel better, but it makes someone else, maybe a naysayer or a doubter, feel better, or at least not closed off.
Yeah, it's a good question, though. Biofield is limiting in that way because it limits itself to what we call, biological systems, which are carbon-based, and there are many discussions that we can have about this. Even in Jainism, for example, our forces of nature, air, water, fire, they're described as single-cell organisms, right? And in other words, like, they're living in some way. They had their own system of categorization, and so, to think that Mm. Fire isn't alive and conscious, that it's not the fundamentals that comprise our constitutions, as we know full well in our whole system healing methods, like acupuncture, like the Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. We have some sense of this. It is hard sometimes to bridge all the languages. I think we also have to be very astute, especially at this time as we move forward in this field with, the study of energy and information, the study of consciousness, that we're not doing this in some sort of colonialist way and pandering to colonialist mentality and pandering to materialist mentality. First of all, from the scientific point of view, it's a huge loss if we do that. I am sure our listeners here appreciate this. And the scientists, all of them need to appreciate this too. You're literally missing information if you're going to just eschew this. In my TEDx Berkeley talk, I mentioned that I had a professor at the University of Arizona where I did my master's work literally say to me that Ayurveda was primitive medicine. And I was like so taken aback. First of all, he had no bearing to say that. He was a statistics professor. He didn't even know anything about Ayurveda. So it was an ignorant statement because, clearly there was evidence and research evidence. And of course, I argued with him at that point. But it just reified to me like how deep the colonialism is in our systems of education in the West. And I experienced that firsthand, as you know, with the TEDx Berkeley talk, because though I was asked to give a talk again on the science of the biofield and I presented data, I was literally told weeks before not to mention the words Reiki or Qi because TED forbade it. I don't know if you knew that, but yes, I was
No, I
literally
didn't.
asked not to say. And I looked at them and I said, I just laughed, and the curators looked really uncomfortable because they had invited me to do this, right? It's a
Right.
longer story, but and I have, kind of a web page that describes the whole process of what we went through. But I said to them, "Look, you know what this talk is about. You invited me to come speak at it, and you told me to share the science because you want to dispel the myth that there's no evidence behind this and that it's real. And I speak about monocultural ethnocentrism in the talk. And now here you are telling me not to use the words Reiki or Chi. Like, that doesn't make any sense." I said, "I can't censor myself like that. I'm just going to say what comes out of my mouth, right?" Anyway, the story with TED was there people may not be aware, but TED corporate guidelines, they found out weeks before the talk, have 4 stipulations. So there's TED, right? Independently TEDx curated talks. And people have full freedom in inviting guests and things like that. But ultimately those talks go to TED corporate. TED corporate reviews them and then decides whether they're worthy, whether they get what they call censored, right? Or even banned. So they said they have a set of guidelines that they send to TEDx people, all the TEDx people. And those guidelines say, we're not telling you not to do anything in these 4 areas, but just know that these are 4 areas that we look at that we flag a lot of talks in. Anything having to do with healing, anything having to do with placebo, climate change denying, and beware of anyone trying to draw parallels between science and spirituality. So they tell me this, and I'm like laughing because I'm like, well, I hit 3 of the 4. I'm definitely
I was going to say, why did they invite you?
And I said, they didn't know, right? They didn't know about these guidelines. And then they got all nervous. And we're weeks before this. COVID is just lifting. There are going to be 2,000 people at TEDx Berkeley. This is happening in 2 weeks. They're telling me this. And I'm like, well, too bad. I know full well that some of my other colleagues' talks have been banned and censored as well. So I'm walking into this kind of probably more aware than they were of what was going to happen. But, I said, we're just going to move forward and not be afraid again. We're going to, we're going to share the truth of this. And I gave the talk and I walked off that stage feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And that felt really good. I had so many people in that audience who came up to me, doctors, physicians, physicists, super interested in the biofield. So I felt like I had done my job and I was really happy. Then later I came to find out that despite the fact that TED had asked for a reference list, which I was happy to provide, so I gave them a reference list of 29 peer-reviewed published references of every single scientific assertion and slide that I had in my talk. Some of those were like science papers, like papers in really high tier journals, and only 3 of them were my studies of the 29.
Right.
They quietly released the talk without telling me, so, I didn't have a way of doing a launch, but more concerning, they flagged the talk without telling me, saying it was only based on my personal research. And they changed the title of my talk without telling me or asking for permission to change it. So the original title of my talk, and this is coming right after COVID, because I'm feeling into what people need to hear. And I put, "We're wired to heal each other. The science of interconnection." That was the title of the talk.
Ooh,
They
beautiful.
changed it to health and interconnection. No science, no happy, we're wired to heal each other, nothing, right? Because they wanted to bury it, basically, and that's what they did. They buried the talk, hardly comes out in search. They censored it. So when I found out, I mentioned it to my community. And if anybody goes and checks out the TEDx talk, you can just type in my name and TEDx Berkeley and it will pop up eventually. The TEDx used to come up first, but like I said, I think I've been shadow banned a little bit or whatever the situation is. There are so many comments from practitioners that are like, "Why did you censor this talk? Like, it's not okay." And unfortunately, TED does this a lot. I've heard from so many people from MDs who talk about the nature of spirituality and its role in healing in their patients, from people who talk about the power of breathing and the science of breathing and its effects on health. There are so many talks in the holistic health space that TED has buried, banned, or censored. So people need to know this. TED and Wikipedia are not reliable sources of information. I'm sorry. They're super biased.
Well, what I hear you sharing is a calling in of all of us listening to go find those. I had
Oh,
no
yeah.
idea.
Find them, comment,
I want to go
reach
find
out
the
to TED and
censored
say, "Why are
ones.
you censoring these talks?" Like, they need to hear it.
I had no
By the way, this
idea.
this happened to Deepak when he was on the TED stage and they didn't want to release his talk for a while. And, Deepak being Deepak had, a big, I don't know if it was the New York Times or SF Gate or whatever covering the story. They called him and they said, "Stop," and he said, "Well, then release my talk." So, he had that kind of leverage, but most people don't have that kind of leverage. And so their talks just get buried and the truth doesn't get out to patients. And it's not okay. It's really not okay. So I will never do a TED talk again. I just, I told the story to my husband and he was like, "Well, you got on their stage, you got on the white man stage. What did you expect?" Okay. Yeah, I guess you're right. We'll have to create our own platforms. And so that's part of what we're doing at She is we're getting
Yeah,
the word out there, through our documentary, through the webinars that we do, Free Friday webinars every month.
that are
It's
incredible. I
yeah.
recommend everyone join.
Yeah, it's super
Yeah,
fun. They're
they're
free and,
amazing.
yeah, you just go to webinarsonhealing.com. There's the advertisement. Go to webinarsonhealing.com. Check out all the cool webinars that we have. Join the conversation. This needs to be democratized and the truth of healing has to come out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're speaking to the person who's like the biggest enabler and cheerleader for all of your work and everything we're talking about. I know our time is short, but I have to ask you because I don't think a lot of people I don't know if a lot of people know this about you. They see your book, they're going to see your when does your documentary release, by the way?
We will be submitting to film festivals this fall, and we hope to do a grand public release in the spring of next year,
Of
so probably around
2026.
April. But if
Okay.
you go to theenergythatheals.com, theenergythatheals.com will take you to our website where you can watch the beautiful trailer. We're so inspired by all the patient stories that we've, had the privilege of kind of capturing in there. You'll see a lot of leading lights. We have the VP of Scientific American in there. We have leading academics from Harvard and other places, but it's the patients that make the film sing. I'm
Yeah.
really excited about it. Check out the trailer, share it with your friends, get on the email list, and we'll let you know when it comes out.
I'm so excited for it. Um, and if people also want to check out this other beautiful side of you, which is your rock and roll side, you have you have webinars, you have lectures. I've been part of them about using your voice and how our voice is healing. Obviously, you are an incredible speaker. You captivate people with your energy. You're not afraid to be yourself, and you're just a magnet. People people are drawn to you. Your voice is part of your medicine. I'm sure you know this, but I'm just reflecting it back to your voice. Literally, metaphorically, your voice is medicine. For those of us like me, I'm raising my hand here, who feel hesitant about using our voice, whether that's in public forums or just speaking truth or actually just singing in the shower or in the car, what's your advice?
And, I do whole workshops on this, and I'll continue to do them. The Cos and I actually are doing my husband and I are now doing a workshops, called Voice Your Creativity, where we explore this through poetry and song. So, we did
Perfect.
that at Shivananda Ashram this year, and I'm sure we'll do it again. I'll let you know when we're gonna do that again, but I also pull a lot of this into some other retreats. I have one coming up in Esalen in a week, actually. But also, we have an Embody the Goddess workshop where we're going to be doing some of this at Shivananda Ashram in November. So if people want to check that out, they can go to my website because we will be doing some deeper vocal work there. But like some practical tips to just get us started. One, just get comfortable with your voice, which is the hardest thing, I think, for us. And listen, I don't know if any of us ever get fully comfortable with the sound of our voice, and that's okay. But just getting comfortable connecting breath and energy with sound is the first step. So doing those really nice hums when we get out in the shower or when we wake up, and think of it not so much as like, "Oh, I gotta use my voice and I'm gonna do this practice," but more as like a kind of tuning into oneself. Think of it as like an energy boost practice because it will boost your energy, and so it just starts with, "Hmm." It's that simple, and guess what? It is medicinal because as we just hum with our breath, we activate the vagus nerve, right? We're all familiar with the vagus nerve. We stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system, so it's very nourishing for our autonomic nervous system and our cells to do that practice, and it's a great way to just get to reconnect breath with voice, breath with voice, breath with voice, and then we can get more nuanced in terms of and your readership know this very well, and so do you, Hanani. What does it feel like to express fire in my voice? What's a song that I like that is fiery? Let me listen to it first, and then let me sing along with it and see what it feels like to channel fire through my body through the voice. What about water? What about air? So this is the way I approach it, personally and in my teaching, is to explore the elements and we could deconstruct the emotions into elements, right? Which
Mhm.
we do in so many traditions. So that there's no judgment around what it means like to feel angry and channeling anger. No, we're not channeling anger, really. What we're channeling is the vibration. We're channeling fire. So I find those practices really helpful, just first to get to know our voice with the breath and feel the nourishment and the connection with energy as a first step. And then as we move into expression, to explore what the voice sounds like when we want to communicate an elemental force.
I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I was in your Goddess of Sound workshop or webinar. I forget what
Cool,
platform
yes,
for what.
yeah, voicing the goddess, that's a
Voicing the
beautiful
Goddess.
course,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was. I think I actually started doing it for a second time while I was reading your book too.
Mm,
And
cool.
at the time, just the idea of humming in my own space with people I love, my kids, my husband, was terrifying for me, like, to the point of, like, almost crying.
Mm,
That's how blocked this area was. That makes a lot of sense for my background, my upbringing of, like, make nice, don't ruffle feathers.
right.
And it has taken me so long to even do a podcast like this, right? Of like
Yeah,
speaking,
yeah.
asking difficult questions. But there was this moment with just humming that I felt it felt like a physical gate released. And I felt chi, I felt water, I felt moisture, I felt this rush of energy.
Yes, you
And it was like,
connected your sacral, yes, you
yeah,
connected the sacral with the throat.
one of those knots when it had released itself or untangled enough for movement to flow through. And ever since then, things have been different. So I want to share that with you as like
Yeah,
direct
I
feedback
love
because I know you have so many people who do your work and it's so beautiful and the ripples are spreading. So consider Yinspired as another ripple in this like and all the drops that you're you're planting all over the globe because it really I don't know if I would be where I am without that encouragement, without your loving guidance, without that presence of just encouragement and such motherly the way mother nature nurtures you and guides you. So thank you.
yeah. Oh my
Thank you.
gosh, well, thank you, that's, like, really touches my heart to hear, and Yeah, as we talked about before, right? Like wrapping some of this up, that voicing our creative desire, um, through acknowledging what we really want and not being embarrassed or afraid to ask for what we want, that really does open the gate, because then we can feel the flow of that creative life force and it does unblock it. It's not even something we have to try to do. We don't have to try to unblock ourselves. It will naturally happen when we give in. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a surrendering. Like, I mean, coming full circle, there was a moment where I had to make a decision. Was I just going to like continue life as it was, or was I really ready to make a difference in the way that I was experiencing the world with my voice? It was a decision. And when I said yes, it was like, okay, you shall receive,
Yeah.
it was, yeah. So,
Yeah, the statement that keeps coming through my head that I guess wants to be spoken at the moment is to commit to the truth. Surrender is part of like commit to the truth. I surrender, I commit to the truth. Let the truth guide me.
that's
And
so
that's where
powerful.
I think that when, and I know we need to end, but we did mention voicing the goddess, which is a course on Shift Network. I think it's evergreen. So if you type in voicing the goddess, you can purchase it through Shift Network. But we do get into all of the Hindu and tantric goddesses that can help empower us energetically and open the voice. And we do chanting and all that, as you know. But Saraswati Ma is a very resonant goddess here because she is the goddess of many things, but she's the goddess of wisdom. And there's a purity in her because she does commit to the truth. Like wisdom is the truth. It can be expressed through science, through art, and that she embodies both of those things, as you know, because of, again, no separation. There is something about when we commit to the truth that process just becomes easier, and I think the voice becomes more magnetic, as you mentioned. It draws people in. So this is different from that kind of, I hate to say, westernized term of speak your truth. Speaking your truth sometimes means speaking our opinions in a fiery way, which is okay sometimes, but committing to the truth is a little different.
That's a good mic drop. Thank you. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful. I will make sure to find all the different links where people can find you, where they can learn from you. I know time is short. I usually try to leave time for a rapid fire. Do you have
Okay.
time to do a quick rapid fire?
I think so. Let me just check. I think my next meeting's at 2:30. Yep, I do have
Okay,
time.
we'll just do this really quick then. You can say pass to anything, but just an opportunity for the listeners to see you in a
And
different light.
rapid fire means like one-liner responses? Yeah?
Yeah, and someone rebranded this the other day as the slow burn. So whatever comes natural to you. The best advice you ever received.
Know thyself.
The worst advice you ever received.
You can't do this, people aren't ready for it.
Are you a morning bird or a night owl?
Night owl.
What's your favorite food treat?
Chocolate. That's a hard one. I don't know. Sugar is what I really want to say. That's like my nemesis. Anything sweet.
What about your favorite beverage?
Kombucha. No, wait, I don't know. I don't know why I said kombucha. It's chai.
What is a book that changed your life or your mindset?
It's hard to answer that question. It's really hard to answer that question. Being a bookworm, it's still hard to answer that question because I'm thinking about recent books. I think one that really changed my mindset, though, was Women Who Run with the Wolves. Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. It just gave me full permission to go into the archetypal, and I
Yeah.
love that.
Finish the sentence. Be the type of person who.
Spreads love.
Last one. One wish for healthcare.
To actually deliver healthcare.
That's my favorite way to end because it's like the final mic drop. Thank you so much. You are such a joy. You're a gem, a friend, sister, soul sister. I am just always cheering you on from afar. So thank you. If you ever have a day of doubt, just text me. I'll remind you. I'll send you
Thank
chocolate.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm sure I will be calling you in the next year.
Yeah. Give a big hug to your whole family. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who would appreciate it. Your support helps create positive ripples in our communities. Want to continue the conversation? You have questions for the guest or want to explore more? Visit substack.com and look for Yinspired, Yinspired. It's free to subscribe, and you'll receive every new episode plus access to transcripts, show notes, resources, and the opportunity to join the discussion. From my heart to yours, create a day you love. This podcast is for entertainment, education, and inspirational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast is diagnostic or direct medical advice and does not establish a practitioner-patient relationship. Seek care from a highly trained medical provider for your healthcare concerns.